Well, and that's what we're trying to do here at the National Police Association is we're trying to give people an outlet to be able to support the police. A lot of people don't know what to do to support their local law enforcement. So that's what we're trying to do is to show people ways that they can support their local law enforcement, because it doesn't just benefit law enforcement, it ultimately benefits the community.
So what would you recommend?
Well, here's what I would tell people. First and foremost, when you see a police officer, smile and wave at them. Hey, and cops love things like when somebody, their kids, I know this happens a lot in our local police department here. Kids will draw pictures or write thank you letters and stuff, and people will drop it off at the station. There's a lot of areas where you can go to a back the blue situation. And then I would ask people to go to our website, nationalpolice.org, and look at our public service announcements. If you see a cop in trouble, you see a cop getting beat up and there's no other cops around, ask that cop, hey, do you need some help? A lot of people just pull out their cell phone and record it. A lot of times police officers need some help. So see if you can help. And I would also ask you, follow us on Facebook and on Twitter and get involved in supporting your local police.
All right, everybody, welcome to All Things Crime. I am super excited to have an amazing guest this morning. Her name's Betsy Brantner Smith, and she is as far as law enforcement goes, she's the jack of all trades, has been around for a long time. And I tell you, I'm more than excited to have her on. Betsy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you.
Oh, fantastic. So let's go through your resume a little bit. First of all, 29 years serving in law enforcement in various areas, mostly in Illinois, my understanding.
Yes, I actually became a police dispatcher in my little town in Illinois when I was a senior in high school. I worked the 4 to 12 shift, and I think my dad thought that would keep me out of trouble. And so I had a fun senior year in high school listening to the radio of all my friends getting in trouble. And then I went to college and I was a dispatcher. And 2 weeks out of college, I found myself at age 21 in the Cook County Sheriff's Police Academy just outside of Chicago. A little bit of a culture shock. And I had 29 great years. I loved law enforcement. And I'm still, a big part of the profession now. Can't seem to give it up.
Yeah, well, once it gets in your blood, I had 14 years in the military. And I'll tell you, it's, I've been out for, almost 20 years now. But amazingly, it's such an ingrained part of you that it's impossible to give it up.
Yep.
And why would you want to, right?
Well, exactly. And I was very fortunate that I had a kind of a parallel career as I was, moving up, doing different things in law enforcement. I was a trainer locally, and then I got a little bit of statewide attention. Then I got some national attention, and ended up writing for a bunch of different entities. And then I got a job with the Law Enforcement Television Network. Some old time cops will remember that, LETN, which was kind of a CNN for cops at the time, and got a show on there. And then everything just exploded. I ended up becoming still am the only female instructor for the Street Survival Seminar. And then we started our own company with my husband, Dave Smith, who, again, a lot of cops know is JD Buck Savage. So I'm also Mrs. JD Buck Savage. And that's what we do now. We run around and we're training cops, and we write a lot of articles. And now I'm the spokesman for the National Police Association. So you can see me on Newsmax and Fox News and Town Hall and on Dinesh D'Souza's podcast, and I have my own show on Pluto and the NPA Report, and boy, I'll tell you, I'm busy and life is good.
That is awesome. Yeah, I was going to mention that you are the national spokesperson for the National Police Association, so that is awesome. Obviously, you're in the know, and understand everything that's going on around the country with law enforcement.
Oh yeah, I mean it's really it's a difficult time for law enforcement. There's this anti-police, defund the police sentiment happening that we dealt with this back in a post-Ferguson world. After the completely justified Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, there was this anti-police sentiment that was largely perpetuated by the president. We really coming out of that. We had a pro guy in the White House, and things were looking really good, and crime was pretty low comparatively in the United States because the economy was good. Then the George Floyd situation happened in Minneapolis, and this whole anti-cop sentiment again just exploded, and now we're seeing crime on the rise, especially violent crime. It's crazy, and I'm sure you talk about this, that we in 2020 we recorded the highest ever homicide rate in our nation's history. That's just crazy. And here we are dealing with all that, and still there's so much talk of reimagine policing, defund policing, and it's happening all over the country. It's crazy.
Another thing that is really crazy about it is how concentrated it is in certain areas. Because
Yes.
Even though it's nationwide, and yes, the crime rate as a whole is ticking up, and I think that's from a lot of that attitude that you're talking about, and that stems from our quote unquote leadership, but it's not everywhere. I live in Utah, and other than downtown Salt Lake, even after the George Floyd incident, there was one night of rioting, and then the Salt Lake City PD and other agencies around there, they shut that thing down. And we haven't had any rioting in Utah since. And so most of this crime is pretty locally based. And I think that, again, is a direct relationship with and a reflection from the local leadership. I mean, I look at Portland, for example. I just see absolutely no excuse for that. And that is totally allowed by the Portland mayor.
It's almost encouraged.
Yeah, which is sad because we were talking earlier about Dion Joseph, and I'm a huge fan of his, especially on LinkedIn. And by the way, any of our listeners, you absolutely need to get on social media and follow Betsy, and also follow some of my other guests that I've had. Some of these just absolute fantastic patriot and wonderful people. So you need to follow them and definitely understand what they understand, because without policing, without a strong law enforcement across the country, you think the chaos is bad now. I can't even imagine how bad it would be if this whole defund the police. Well, ironically, the defund the police movement that started in Minneapolis, they've turned around because of this crime spike. And they've basically said, oops, guess we need to allocate, what was it, $6.4 million or something like that toward bolstering up the police agency now that they've decimated it.
Well, yeah, what they ended up having to, they took $9 million out of the police budget. They ended up having to come back and put 6.4 million back into it just to try and recruit new police officers and get them trained, because Minneapolis PD is down over 200 cops. They've got about 150 police officers who have put in for disability, largely related to the George Floyd riots. And a lot of the disability claims that are being processed right now are for post-traumatic stress. If people knew what really happened during the George Floyd riots of May 2020 to the Minneapolis Police Department, they would be absolutely astounded. Those officers, and we've talked to them, they felt that they were left to die. They were running 3 and 4 to a patrol car. They had outdated riot gear. Not everybody even had a helmet. And they had minimal communication with leadership. They were told no matter what happens, you're going to have to not arrest anybody. And then those officers at the 3rd precinct were forced to watch as the 3rd precinct was burned to the ground by Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters. They watched their home burn down, and they were not allowed to arrest anybody. It was just it's an unbelievably horrific situation. And unfortunately, we're about to revisit that because, we're coming into jury selection for Officer Derek Chauvin. They already have erected, fences around the Hennepin County Courthouse. They're bringing in the National Guard, and it's just it's going to be horrible for the community, for the local businesses, and for the police officers.
You want to hear something really amazing is Hennepin County up in Minneapolis purchased an M-Vac system. And if you don't know what an M-Vac is, it's a wet vacuum system designed to collect DNA. And I am headed up there next week. So,
awesome.
Yeah. So I'm not telling my wife what's going on up there, but I'll tell her when I get back. But
guess where I was, honey?
Yeah, during jury selection, and they said, everything's boarded up, but we're not really concerned yet until like around the end of April, when they're basically lining themselves up that it doesn't matter what the outcome of this jury or what this court case is, it's going to be ugly. So
yes.
If he's convicted, there'll be rioting. If he's not guilty, there will be rioting. And so again, that is all based on the county, the city, and the state leadership that these are all politicians. And so I think there's so much just concerned with their own careers as opposed to doing what's right. And I think that's one of the saddest parts of what's happening in the United States right now is everybody looks at it through the lens of political expediency and really how is this going to benefit my career, as opposed to really what is right for the people, and allowing BLM or whoever it is burn the place down because they're upset about the outcome of a trial. Or now, don't get me wrong, everybody, and including every cop that I've talked to, is just horrified by what happened to George Floyd. Nobody disputes that. But to allow the crimes that happen afterwards, it's like, why justify one with another?
Exactly. And that's the frustration. And then when we see, now in a post George Floyd era, we see various officer involved shootings, like the Rayshard Brooks shooting in Atlanta, the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. These were justified law enforcement uses of force. And yet, there are the riots and the lies in the media. And it's incredibly frustrating. It goes back to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, where Officer Darren Wilson ended up shooting Michael Brown, who was trying to take his gun, trying to kill him. And 3 times now, Officer Darren Wilson has been found to have done no wrongdoing. And yet both he and his wife, who was also a cop, they can't work in law enforcement, and so careers were ruined because of a national temper tantrum over something that was justified. And that's the frustration. When you talk about police leadership, is one of the things that our police leaders need to do is stand up when police officers do the right thing and say, we did the right thing. It's unfortunate when we have to use deadly force on somebody. That's one of the things because you have the same opportunity I do to interview really solid people in the law enforcement profession and beyond. One of the best interviews I ever did was with Chief James Craig from Detroit PD. And when you look at the post George Floyd era, you'll notice that Detroit never burned. There were peaceful protests, but Detroit never burned to the ground. And that's because they have a strong police chief who gets out there in front of people and says, look, here's what we did. Here's why we had to do it. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. I'll get you more information. And he's always out there talking to the community and talking to the media. And he works with the community. He doesn't kowtow to them. That's real leadership.
Being in the corporate world, I look at these kind of things and I said, imagine the CEO of a company something goes sideways, like they have a product problem or something like that. And the first thing they do is they say, you know what, either I'm not going to say anything and I'm just going to let the media narrative or whatever happen, or I'm going to go out there and make excuses for it and allow my company building to be burned down because people are mad at the product being, you know, none of it makes sense. It's like, look, if you want to be called a police chief, or if you want to be called a city commissioner or a city council person or a mayor, then there's a certain obligation that you have to not only your employees, but to all of your citizens, not just the people that are mad, and they can be mad. It says in the First Amendment, you have every right to peacefully protest. But the moment you pick up a rock or something and throw it through a window, you have now the entire game has changed, and you are no longer a peaceful protester, and they
Right.
can't
Now you're a
tolerate that.
violent rioter.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
can't tolerate violence.
right.
And there have been several police chiefs who have lost their jobs over the last 10, 11 months, you know, like Chief Carmen Best in Seattle. You know, she ended up retiring because she stood up for her officers. She denounced the violence. She denounced things like Chaz Chop. And she ended up, you know, having to leave. And there were other police chiefs, the city council or the mayor, whatever wants me to do, and I'm gonna kowtow to the rage mob. And we just can't do that. We cannot give in to the rage mob. When you know, you become a police officer, you, just like when you serve in the military, you end up raising your hand and saying that you will defend the Constitution. And the Constitution says peaceful protest is appropriate. Violent rioting is not.
And there's something else that I've spoken to numerous interviews about, and that is the only person that hates a bad cop more than anybody else is a good cop. And
Exactly.
when you have 99% of the entire 700,000 cops out there that really detest the bad cops, and because they all pay for the sins of the few, and when that happens, you know, they will get rid of them. And you know, people have to be, just like eventually the bad doctors will be discovered, and they'll get rid of them. They'll lose their medical license or whatever. And it's amazing that nobody talks about canceling doctors. You know,
or defunding them. Right. I mean, that's what, and I'm glad you brought that up because we talk about that a lot. 250,000 people a year die from medical mistakes.
yeah,
And yet nobody's out protesting in hospitals. Nobody's calling to defund the doctors. Nobody's calling to put the doctors in prison, you know, and get rid of the whole profession.
yeah.
You know, imagine if American law enforcement would, you know, we end up, you know, American law enforcement ends up killing about 8 to 15 unarmed people a year. Now, most of those people were trying to kill a cop with either take the cop's gun, obtaining a weapon that they didn't have, running us over with a car. It's a very rare occurrence. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that again, we call leadership into task, is we've got to fight that false narrative that American law enforcement officers are out there hunting down young unarmed Black men to murder. It's just not happening. And Black Lives Matter and Antifa will try to convince you that it is. And they talk about this epidemic of Black people being killed by the police. And that's just false.
Yeah, and it's sad because honestly, a really amazing profession and full of really good people. I know a lot of cops, and they are all good people. I'm sure, like I said, I haven't met enough yet. It's just a matter of time, but I haven't met enough that I've actually met somebody that I just look at him and I'm like, that is just not a good dude, and
Right.
he needs to be taken out. You know, the numbers are just, they just don't pan out. And so, yes, I admit, every time I see those red and blue lights behind me and I knew that I was speeding, it is a bad day. and I know that ultimately I'll probably just get a ticket, but that cop doesn't know that.
Right.
And when I see him walking up on the passenger side and he's got his hand on the hilt of his weapon, and I'm like, you know what? That guy, he has to be careful. He wants to go home to his family just like I do. And yet he runs risks that most of us can't even comprehend.
Right.
Even being in the military, I never actually had to deploy to anywhere. And so it was just bizarre the way my career fell in between wars. A little FYI for you. I arrived at the 101st Airborne Division, which I'm sure you know is a rapid deployment division. I
Yeah.
arrived there probably 4 or 5 months after they got back from the first Gulf War. And so somehow my career, just as it was going, I ended up right after the first Gulf War. And then I was in training divisions and training guys that were going off to the second one. Anyways, just a weird time that I never had to deploy. But the bottom line is, and my point, I'll eventually get to my point. That's one of the things that we do, right? The point is that you have to rise to the moment. And cops, for the most part, are under that kind of almost wartime like pressure all the time.
Yeah.
And they have no idea this guy that they're pulling over to for a broken light or a speeding ticket. They have no idea if that person has a weapon in the car. They have no idea if that person is who knows, and so they have to treat everybody as if they are an extreme threat until they've ascertained that they're not. You can't name another profession that is like that.
Exactly. We just had a police officer killed in, I believe it was Virginia, who just made a routine quote unquote traffic stop. And he didn't even get the door open of his patrol car to get out and go talk to the driver. And the driver popped out, shot, and killed him.
Wow.
And this is the reality of law enforcement. And that's what, when we talk about the depolicing and reimagining policing and all that, you hear a lot of talk in some large urban areas. Let's send in social workers to a lot of these situations instead of police officers. Well, that's terrific, except that so many times when a law enforcement officer is attacked, they went to something as innocuous as a 911 hang-up call or a well-being check. And in these mental health situations, when people have called, very often it's family members who've called 911 and said, my family member is having a mental health episode, et cetera, they end up obtaining a weapon, this and that. To send unarmed social workers into those situations is so deadly for the social workers. It's unthinkable. And it's sad when law enforcement has to use force against somebody who is on drugs or is mentally ill. But we're the ones that unfortunately are tasked with that. And it would be great if every patrol cop in this country could have a licensed social worker riding along with them. I think that would be awesome. Nobody wants to pay for it.
And frankly, I dare say none of the social workers want to do that.
No, they're not suicidal.
No,
They want to help people in a situation that's safe for them. And I think that's what they deserve.
Oh, yes. And the interesting thing, again, going back to Dion Joseph, is, he works at Skid Row in LA.
Mhm.
And so that alone should tell you the kind of situation that he's in every day. But his point was you have to actually make sure that the chemical barrier in between you and that person, whether it's male or female, you make sure that chemical barrier, they can't even recognize that you're another human when they're on drugs and stuff like that. And so if they're in the middle of the street swinging a baseball bat or a chain or threatening other people, and maybe they have a knife or God forbid a gun, then social workers are not going to be able to handle that. And frankly, nobody in society should want them to handle that, because that's not what social workers are for.
Exactly. And unfortunately, law enforcement is tasked with, and that's the thing, people, like everybody likes to second guess us. There's lots of, I'm on Twitter and there's lots of keyboard warriors on Twitter who like to attack police tactics and things like that. And it's like cops have to know a little bit about a million different things to be able to do our job. So yes, we have to know about drugs. We have to know about mental illness. We have to know everything from de-escalation techniques to how to place a center mass shot with our pistol and a million things in between. I was a cop for 29 years. I delivered 2 babies while I was on the job. Fortunately, I knew how to do that. So there are so many things that police officers end up having to get involved in. And so we have to know a tiny bit about a lot of different things. And yet everything we do is criticized. And now, of course, everything we do is being videotaped, recorded. It's a lot of pressure. That's why when we were talking about Minneapolis, this is why Minneapolis is 200 police officers short right now, because they've had so many officers leave with post-traumatic stress issues. And we're seeing that look at NYPD. They have so many retirements that HR can't process them fast enough. And we have police officers leaving LA and Austin and Chicago. And so, exactly what you just said, it's these large urban areas that already had crime problems to begin with. Now they have police officers leaving, and they're either retiring, or a lot of them are leaving for places like where you live in Utah, or where I live in Arizona. They're fleeing and they're going to places who appreciate the police.
Even if it's a massive pay cut to move into an area that, yeah, the cost of living is a lot cheaper here than it would be in New York. And yeah, they're probably moving away from family, but to not get shot at all the time, to not get screamed at, I saw, even though a bucket of water getting dumped on a NYPD officer, it was probably even hot that day, so maybe it even felt good. That's not the point. The point is, that's an absolute huge show of disrespect. And the fact that that officer didn't react, he didn't know what was in that. He didn't know what was, that it might have been water in that bucket. What if that had been acid? You just never know.
What if it was urine, which happens all the time on a riot line?
Right. In fact, that friend of mine that's with Salt Lake PD was telling me that the night of the riots, shortly after, or the night after the George Floyd incident, they all rolled into that riot, and most of them didn't have riot gear. And there were 29 officers that were seriously hurt from that. And that's just in Salt Lake. And that wasn't even a major riot. Yeah, the number of injuries, like you said, the PTSD, the problems with the officers, it's really sad, because again, it's a noble profession, and these guys deserve our respect, not our ire. Now, the guy that had, that caused the whole George Floyd incident, yeah, I am fully supportive of him going to trial. And if there's enough evidence to convict him, then so be it. That's the way our justice system works. But for the rest of them, all the cops that are suffering from that one police officer's actions, that's just wrong. And like you said earlier, there's no other profession in the world that suffers the sins of the few.
Right. And what I want people to understand is, we have about 100 police officers a year are killed feloniously, where we are either shot or stabbed to death or run over by a car intentionally, things like that. We don't riot when someone kills one of our own. We work through the justice system to arrest them and bring them to trial. And if they end up attacking another police officer, we end up sometimes using deadly force. But we don't riot. We don't rail against the system. We don't bring up anyone's race. And we work within the system. And so, that's what needs to happen. And, it's just like we saw in Baltimore when the prosecutor there in the Freddie Gray case overcharged, arrested those officers that, she said were responsible for the death of Freddie Gray. The officers went to trial. All evidence was presented. And what do you know? They were all acquitted. And that's what's happening. I think that's what's going to happen in Atlanta and some of the other cases out there. There's one in Oklahoma City right now where these officers end up being investigated and then quickly overcharged with crimes that they didn't commit. Because a lot of people don't understand the justice system either. You know, you talk about Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis. You know, why wasn't he? People want to know, why isn't he charged with first-degree murder? Because he didn't commit first-degree murder. You have to understand our justice system isn't Law and Order SVU. It's we have actual laws. A lot of people don't understand the way the justice system works. That each case has to be handled according to the law. So there are different degrees of murder in each state. It's different, and a lot of these overzealous prosecutors end up overcharging people. And I think we may see that in Minneapolis. There's a real good chance that Derek Chauvin won't get convicted of anything when all the evidence is presented, because George Floyd had a lot of health issues. The autopsy clearly shows that he was full of fentanyl, that he had terrible heart issues. So there were a lot of mitigating circumstances, and it's going to be interesting to watch. But like you said, whether he's convicted, Chauvin is convicted or not, the city's probably going to burn again.
Yeah, which again is sad because
Very.
the most marginalized people in that city are the ones that are going to suffer the most. It's not. It's not going to be the city council people. They probably don't even live anywhere close to where the rioting will happen. And
exactly. Well, and that's the thing that one of the things we've done at the National Police Association is we've gotten involved in Minneapolis trying to advocate not just for the police department, but for the citizens. You know, we filed amicus briefs and because we said these citizens are asking for help from the police department, the amount of service that they did in a year and a half ago. And businesses are failing, people are getting hurt. You know, carjackings are up almost 400% in Minneapolis. Rape is up, robbery is up. There are some robbery victims, businesses that are robbery victims in Minneapolis that get robbed 2 and 3 times a week by the same guy. So we finally decided, the National Police Association, we're going to get involved in this and advocate for the officers, but advocate for the community. And that's what policing is all about. We can go back to, you know, the origins of law enforcement. Sir Robert Peel in England. The people are the police and the police are the people. We're supposed to be in this together. And that's one of the things that we're involved in. We're really all about not just police, but we're about the community.
that is one of the saddest things I think anybody has heard in a long time, is because getting rid of it just does not make any sense to me for anybody to think that society will continue to function in any semblance of normality based on having no police. I once had a person tell me that her house was safe because she was armed. So she wasn't worried about it and she didn't want the police around. I was frankly like, you know what? I don't think you fully understand the sheer fact that criminals know that police are out there. They may not know where they are, but they know they're out there. And that alone is a deterrent.
Yes.
And anybody with any kind of common sense understands that. You cannot have a vacancy in all law enforcement. You know, imagine the wild, wild west, as crazy as it was, with no sheriff.
Right. Right.
There's no law. The wild, wild west would once again reemerge in the United States, because when people know that there's no repercussions for their actions, then there's no limit to what some people, obviously, and the bad guys is obviously who we're referring to. But if they know there's no repercussions, which I think is that no bail thing.
Yeah.
If they know they can rob somebody, and especially like in San Francisco, they know to the dollar how much stuff they can steal, and that they'll never be prosecuted for it. And so they'll walk into a store, and I've heard, you've probably actually confirmed this, but I've heard of people walking into like stores with a calculator, adding up the stuff that they're going to steal, as long as they're under, I think it's like $980 or something like that.
Hmm.
And they're adding it up on a calculator, and then they'll just walk out of the store.
And see, people will say, well, they're just trying to feed their children, this and that. They're stealing liquor and things like baby formula that they can sell. They're not stealing bread and milk. And they go in there, and again, it depends on the jurisdiction, where you can go in and steal a certain amount, and the police won't even take a report. And the police are not the ones making that decision. That
Right.
is the city leadership who says, well, we're gonna call this, anything under $1,000, we're just gonna call that a petty crime, and we're not gonna take a report. In my home state of Illinois, they just passed they call it a law enforcement reform bill, but it's doing everything from eliminating cash bail to decriminalizing things that used to be felonies or high misdemeanors. And when you start doing that, what you're doing is really you're victimizing the community twice. And you're victimizing them once because they're going to get things stolen from them, or they're going to get hurt, and then you victimize them a second time by telling them, well, there's really nothing I can do about that. And that goes against the reason we become police officers, is because we want to help the community. For us to have to stand by and watch people in our community be victimized, and we have to stand there and not do anything about it, or we have to tell them, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about this, that chips away at our heart. And when we see that day after day after day, what happens is we end up getting out, because we just can't take it anymore. Nobody becomes a police officer. Nobody becomes a police officer to get rich. Believe me, none of us are rich. And nobody becomes a police officer because they want to hurt people. We become police officers because we want to help our community. We want to arrest the bad guy. We want to go out there and be the heroes. And so when we're not able to do that, it wears at us, and we end up getting out and going to do something else. And it's going to be a crisis in a lot of our urban areas eventually. And we're already seeing it in some areas. It really is.
Yeah.
We're having a recruiting and a retention crisis.
Well, as a business owner, I can tell you there's only so much that any business can absorb. And there's another fallacy out there, not just that, all police are bad. That narrative that's being pushed needs to be shut down. But the second narrative is that businesses can absorb any amount of loss. And these businesses, that some of them have been in their locations for decades. And so of course they don't want to move. They love their community. They love being there. They love providing whatever service they provide. But there's a limit to what they can absorb. And at some junction between the COVID shutdowns and riot losses, and being now, especially if they're in an area that petty theft is not even prosecuted, and they provide some kind of a consumer good, where I'm sorry, if I'm a business owner and I see somebody walk in with a calculator starting to add up the stuff that I know that they're just going to walk out of my store with, and there's nothing I can do about it, there's nothing the police will do about it because they can't. There's only so many times I could see that and not just say, I'm done.
Well, sure.
I'm gonna lock my doors. I'm gonna grab the inventory that I have, and I'm gonna load my truck, and I'm gonna go find some place where I can actually conduct business safely. And unfortunately, in the areas that we're talking about, San Francisco and places, there's a reason that Arizona and Utah and Idaho, Wyoming are being flooded with Californians.
Yep.
These people are coming out of, they're sick and tired of it. They can't even fathom living the way because that's no life. And if I can't do, as a business owner, I've been in business for a long time. And as a business owner, the thought of losing money month over month, you just can't do it. And especially small businesses, they operate on, if they have more than 2 or 3 months worth of ability to continue on without any kind of income or at a loss, then they're actually doing really good. Most of them can't afford 1 month. So some of these business owners, again, convenience stores or clothing shops, things like that, if they're in an urban area like that, yeah, they're going to eventually they will have no choice but to close shop or to respond as if they were police, which
Right.
then it gets ugly. And
Exactly.
yeah, so there it's a no-win situation for them. And this goes right back to the politicians that are making these policies and saying, look, it is your responsibility to establish a safe environment. Allow your police to provide a safe environment for me to conduct business. And if they weren't doing that, then either they need to suffer the repercussions of businesses leaving, which is happening en masse in California. Anybody that can leave is leaving,
Yeah.
which
Oh
is
yeah.
and all my friends in Florida and everything, there's a reason that so many New York plates. I was just in Miami a few weeks ago,
Hmm.
and I could not believe how many Massachusetts and New York license plates I saw.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and it's not just because it's wintertime.
Exactly. And the problem is when these business owners leave these communities, then we're left with, you'll hear a lot when we talk about poor communities that there are retail deserts and food deserts and things. That's because these business owners, if you can't make a profit, and then, like you said, small business, their margin is already slim to begin with. If they can't protect their businesses and the police can't help them protect their businesses, why would they stay in these areas where, crime is almost encouraged? So yeah, they end up leaving. I just read something yesterday. There were two studies that came out in a post George Floyd riot era. A lot of people say, well, the insurance will, we burned down a Wendy's in Atlanta, but insurance will build it back up. Yeah, they'll build it back one time, but then, insurance companies aren't forced to insure you. So there's all these small business owners who now can't get insurance. And now because they can't get insurance, whatever happens to them happens, and they can't make any money. So they leave,
Yeah.
like you said, and they go somewhere where the police are allowed to do their job. The insurance companies will insure them, and frankly, the community appreciates them.
And when they do leave, they take jobs with them, they take revenues with them, they take good people with them. I mean, there's only so many people that have the willingness really to be a business owner.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship is kind of a rare thing. And trust me, there is risk and there is stress and there is
Yep. It's not for the faint of heart. I know for a
no,
fact.
no. I'll tell you, there's been more than one night where my wife has woke me up because I'm grinding my teeth. And she's
Right.
like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know." Obviously, I'm thinking about something at work.
Yeah.
So, we've all had to adjust to this new COVID environment. And yeah, it's crazy. Back to the business owner that is there. And again, if they have a brick and mortar type of a business where they have to operate from a certain location, and it doesn't matter if they've been there for decades, at some junction they have to, well, when you can't pay your bills, it's done, you're done.
Yeah.
And eventually they either have to just close up shop or they're going to move. They're going to go somewhere where they can conduct business safely. And
Hmm.
the only way that will ever happen is if there's a police presence. Again, back to that person that said, "Well, I don't need the police running around." Yes, you do. You may be able to personally protect your own home because if you're enabled to be armed, you don't have one of these city ordinances that, like Chicago. I don't know how anybody lives in Chicago. You can't defend yourself. That's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, my youngest kid lives there, and the gun laws are very frustrating. But the
Mm,
thing is, even for somebody like you said who says, well, I can protect my own home, you're still subject to the law. And if you end up shooting an intruder or somebody you perceive to be an intruder, you still have to go through a police investigation. You're still subject to prosecution. So it's not as cut and dried. It's not, it's like you said, it's not the wild, wild west. It's not as cut and dried as it would seem. And that can be very costly. You'll have to hire an attorney, et cetera, et cetera. The police are, that's our job. And American law enforcement appreciates the Second Amendment. We appreciate people who are able to take care of themselves, but we all still have to follow the laws of the Constitution and local, state, and federal law as well. So you don't want to just be this lone wolf out there saying, well, I'll just protect me and mine. You have to involve the government, and the government is law enforcement a lot of times.
Yeah. And why would you want that anyway?
Yeah.
It's my point to that friend was that, yes, you may be able to protect your own home, but when you go to get in your car and you drop your kid off at school, you want that school to be safe. You want the streets to be safe. There's a reason that carjackings are up so much in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
It's because everybody around there knows that the law enforcement's not around. And even if they do get caught, there's not going to be any penalty for it. So, you know what? Let's go steal a car. Maybe we can, go hawk it and get it chopped up and make a little payday. But 400%, that's an insane number.
Well, it is. And that's because, again, the criminals know that in Minneapolis, they're shorthanded, things like that. I think too, you talked about with kids, you take your kid to school. There's a lot of areas where kids are not yet in school, but they will be soon. So we haven't really heard about school shootings. And actually, until this week, there was a fatal shooting in a junior high. The school resource officer wasn't there. A lot of the defund the police, a lot of their movement says get police out of schools. The Los Angeles Unified School District just voted to remove school resource officers from the schools and put them out in patrol vehicles near the schools. So what happens when we have our first school shooting and there's no school resource officer there? There's no security. How are we going to handle that? What is America going to say? Because everybody remembers the Parkland school shooting in Florida, where everybody was enraged because the school resource officer did not respond appropriately. Well, now we're just told we're going to get kids out of school. And, we're going to get police officers out of the schools. They're just moving so backward when it comes to protecting our communities, protecting our kids. And again, it's all based on a false narrative. Police officers are not gunning down innocent people in this country. It's a lie, but nobody wants to talk about the truth because it's not politically correct. It's uncomfortable to talk about the truth, which in and of itself is just unbelievably silly.
Every big movement needs a scapegoat and they need a target. And unfortunately, right now, it's the police. And I think there's multiple reasons for that. And all of them are sinister. And I am scared for the day that if this continues the way it is, then a lot of people in the United States will have no choice but to replace the police with themselves. And that's when it's going to get really ugly, and it's going to be a sad day. But hopefully that day never comes, and hopefully we can come back to common sense policies and allowing the police to actually do their job. Because again, they will police their own, and when the bad police, the people that aren't there to actually serve the community and be there for the right reasons, eventually they'll find them out and they'll get rid of them. But until that day, it's just one of those that we're just going to have to weather this storm, and hopefully we can all come out on top.
Well, and that's what we're trying to do here at the National Police Association is we're trying to give people an outlet to be able to support the police. A lot of people don't know what to do to support their local law enforcement. So that's what we're trying to do is to show people ways that they can support their local law enforcement, because it doesn't just benefit law enforcement, it ultimately benefits the community.
So what would you recommend?
Well, so here's what I would tell people. First and foremost, when you see a police officer, smile and wave at them. And cops love things like when somebody, their kids, I know this happens a lot in our local police department here. Kids will draw pictures or write thank you letters and stuff, and people will drop it off at the station. There's a lot of areas where you can go to a back the blue situation. And then I would ask people to go to our website, nationalpolice.org, and look at our public service announcements. If you see a cop in trouble, you see a cop getting beat up and there's no other cops around, ask that cop, hey, do you need some help? A lot of people just pull out their cell phone and record it. A lot of times police officers need some help. So see if you can help. And I would also ask you, follow us on Facebook and on Twitter and get involved in supporting your local police, because all the polling tells us, there are Gallup polls, Rasmussen polls, most people appreciate the police. Most people don't want us defunded. In fact, they want more police. And especially in poor communities and communities of color, when polled, African Americans are the #1 group of people who say, I don't want less police in my neighborhood. I want more police. So find out what you can do, and the National Police Association can help you do that.
Oh, that's awesome. You know, Cheryl McCullum, I don't know if you know her. She's awesome out of Atlanta. We were having a conversation one time, and we came up with hashtag #PosiPoll, and it stands for Positive Police Pictures.
I love it.
And we shorten it, you know, kind of like Interpol, kind of a play on that. But hashtag #PosiPoll. In fact, I've already seen a few pictures of it that, you know, just if you see a policeman, you know, at a grocery store or something, stop, take a picture with them. You know, do a
Yes.
selfie. Everybody's consumed with selfies anyway. Take a selfie with a cop and then post it with hashtag #PosiPoll. And imagine if just the 700,000 police officers and law enforcement around the country took one picture even a week and posted it somewhere on social media with a hashtag #PosiPoll. The social media would be flooded with amazing pictures.
Fantastic idea. That
You
is
know,
a fantastic idea.
all the pictures of police where they're helping somebody change a tire, or, you know, getting a cat out of a tree, you know, all the things that are kind of, you know, back in the 50s when you actually saw that happen, you know, just things that, but they're doing things all the time. You always hear of officers, and it's usually hear of a week or two later when somebody gets busted for shoplifting, and instead of taking them downtown, the cop pays for their groceries.
Yep.
Those kind of things happen all the time. You know, the very nature of police officers, I found, and they're just like military. None of us really want the spotlight on us. None of us really want to be thrown up and put on a pedestal and said, oh, you know, given all sorts of accolades. That's not why we do the job. But if nobody else will toot your horn, you need to do it. And
exactly,
the police officers that are out there are doing great things every day. Take your cell phone out and take a picture, for crying out loud. You know, stand up for yourselves and start that hashtag #PosiPoll. I think if that trended and if that really started going global, and if people were to see more of what police actually do, because everything, I can't say everything, but 99.9% of everything that police do is behind the scenes. You never know.
yep.
And so get it out there. We've got, somehow we have to counter the narrative that the police are systemically racist and they need to be defunded and we don't need police anymore. That's just garbage. And it frankly, it needs to be countered. And the only way to do it is if good people, including the police, stand up for themselves and start getting the better news out there. Because right now it's kind of like, I don't want to use an analogy that's over dramatic or anything, but you know, the #1 problem we found, that prior to 9/11, we did not recognize that we were at war. They were at war with us, but we didn't recognize that we should have been at war and we should have been much more ready. Well, the police need to understand, and I'm sure the police as a whole, individually, they understand that the war, they are at war. And whether or not they're fighting back or not is, you know, that remains to be seen. But especially, you know, folks like you that are up there with the National Police Association, you have a strong voice. You can get out there and say, hey, it's time for us to stand up for ourselves, because you guys are being unjustly vilified and it's wrong. And you need to understand that the vast majority of people out here in the community support you. But at the same time, we want you to stand up for yourselves. And an easy way to do it is to just start taking some pictures of the good things that you're doing.
I love it. I love it. That's a fantastic idea because we really, truly do need the community to do our job.
Yeah. So, hey, it's kind of a tradition with all things crime to, before I let you go, to kind of lighten things up a little bit. You got to tell us some kind of a fun, something that was just hysterical that happened to you in your entire career. So a story that you love to tell at Thanksgiving. So anything
Oh
that stands out
boy.
that something that happened that you'd love to share with the audience?
Oh boy, you're gonna have to edit this because I got to think about that.
Sorry, I
But
should have.
a
I
lot
should
of
have.
hysterical things, but I'll tell you, not all of them are, not most of them are not funny for the public. Okay, I got one. Go. Okay,
Okay,
ready?
here we go.
So here's your edit. So when I was a young police officer, I went to a burglary of a home, and it was a rather wealthy couple, and sadly they had been burglarized. So we went in and we did our thing, and forensics came and all of that, and the sweet lady who owned the home brought me her little, like $5,000 Bichon little dog that had just gotten back from the groomer. That dog was better coiffed than I was, and she handed me little Fifi and said, I think I can trust you because I know that she's going to need to be fingerprinted and you're going to need her DNA and things to eliminate her, because I'm sure that the bad guys petted her when they came in and burglarized her house. So, officer, I'm going to hand her to you to do all the fingerprinting and the analysis. And so I was like, oh boy. And she was just so sincere. So I took little Fifi and her little bow-haired haircut, and I took her out to the forensics guys. And I'm like, throw a little fingerprint dust on this little white dog, because I got to convince this lady that this dog has been fingerprinted and cleared. And so we did that. And she was so happy that her dog was part of the investigation.
Oh my gosh. All right. I've heard some great stories. That is hysterical. That is so funny.
Yeah, it was one of
Go
those.
out and make sure there's no fingerprints on Fifi, because we know she got petted, and we know that on that dog fur we can get a good fingerprint and probably collect some DNA. Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'll tell you, I bet that poor dog had that fingerprint ink on it for weeks, because they did, the forensic guys, they threw a lot of fingerprint dust around on that dog.
Oh, that stuff's nasty. I can't believe that they would want their dog to have fingerprint powder all over them. But I'll bet that lady took Fifi to every single neighbor in the entire neighborhood and was showing her off. Say, yeah, Fifi. They got some fingerprints of the people that broke into my home. They got fingerprints off of Fifi. Oh, that's absolutely
Undoubtedly.
awesome.
That's the thing about law enforcement. We have, even though it can be a terribly tragic profession, gosh, we have a lot of fun. As your guests all, I'm sure, tell you, we all have lots of funny stories, and it's just, we do have a lot of fun in police work, just like you did in the military.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to actually put together a show that just highlights all of the funny stories that I'm getting, because some of them are just hysterical. A lady that was attacked, and the guy on the way out the door steals her vacuum cleaner. A lady that was a patrol officer, and she got called to come get the Sasquatch out of the backyard that was dancing around a fire. The stories just go on, and I just love it. That's one of my favorite parts of these interviews, is just hearing some of these funny stories. But yeah, fingerprint powder on Fifi. That'll definitely make the highlight reel.
I love it.
Okay, well, Betsy, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some of your thoughts. And I just hope that we can do this again. and it'll be nothing but fun and awesome stuff. And we won't have to talk about, the George Floyd case.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. And hopefully it's coming soon.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Thank you so much. You have a great week, and make sure to tell everybody at the National Police Association hi for us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Okay. We'll talk to you later.